Normandy, summer 1944. A German marksman fires one clean shot from behind a hedgerow. Not at the nearest soldier, not at the biggest group, not at the man making the most noise. At the lieutenant. The American with the map case, the binoculars, the man everyone else keeps glancing toward. In German tactical logic, this is the correct target. Cut off the head, and the body should stop moving. The lieutenant drops into the wet grass. A burst from an MG-42 tears across the slope. The radioman beside him folds over his set. Now the platoon is supposed to be dead in every way that matters. No officer, no radio, no orders from the company commander, no one with the whole plan. And for a few seconds, the Germans think they are watching a machine shut down. But then the machine does something they do not expect. It reroutes. The first voice that rises out of the grass is not an officer's voice. It is rougher, closer to the ground, angrier. A platoon sergeant crawls up from a place the Germans were not watching and points toward the hedgerow. "Repress that gun." The American Browning opens up. The German nest, which a moment earlier had been hunting trapped men, now has to duck under its own dirt wall. Then the sergeant throws a hand signal to the right. One squad starts moving. The attack has not stopped. It has simply changed owners. And that is the part German intelligence kept missing. They understood how to kill a commander. They did not understand how the Americans were learning to move command out of one man's body and into the unit itself. This is not a story about lucky courage. It is not a story about some magical American instinct for improvisation. It is a story about a battlefield misconception so expensive that Germany kept paying for it from Tunisia to Sicily to Normandy to the frozen roads of the Ardennes. The Wehrmacht looked at the American army after its first great humiliation and thought it had seen the truth. A rich army, a clumsy army, an army that needed officers, radios, maps, roads, fuel, air cover, and perfect instructions. Remove those things and the Americans would become what they had been at Kasserine Pass. Confused, brittle, breakable. That was the German theory. Normandy was one of the places where the theory began to bleed. The Bocage was almost built for German defense. Not hedges in the garden sense, earth walls, root systems, trees tangled into banks of dirt that could be taller than a man. A field in Normandy was not open country. It was a room with green walls, and behind one of those walls, a German machine gun crew could wait until an American platoon had crossed too far to retreat. That is exactly what happens on this slope. The Americans are caught in an upward pasture with almost no cover. The grass is too short, the ground is too exposed. The hedgerow ahead hides the muzzle flashes until the MG-42 speaks. The sound is not a series of shots. It is a tear. The men flatten themselves into the soil. The lieutenant tries to keep the platoon moving. The German gunner watches for the obvious marks of command. Map case, binoculars, gesture. A man other men obey. The rifle cracks. The officer is gone. Then the radioman goes down. From the German position, the problem is solved with professional clarity. The brain is dead. The voice to higher command is dead. The platoon should freeze. That expectation did not come from arrogance alone. It came from experience. On the Eastern Front, German soldiers had seen leaderless attacks dissolve under fire. They had seen units lose cohesion after officers fell. They had been trained to recognize that leadership was a target system. First the officer, then the radio, then the NCOs, then the messengers, then the men holding automatic weapons. Break the nerves and the enemy body goes limp. For a few seconds in that Norman field, everything confirms the German prediction. The Americans do not advance. No one stands up. No fresh order comes over a radio. The company commander somewhere behind the line waits for a report that will never arrive. The men on the slope hear only dirt hitting helmets and bullets cutting through grass. The lieutenant's plan, briefed less than an hour before, now seems to have died with him. But the Germans are watching the wrong place. They are staring at the fallen officer. They should be watching the men who had been told why the platoon was moving in the first place. The platoon sergeant was not standing shoulder to shoulder with the lieutenant by accident. He was farther back by design, close enough to know the fight, far enough away not to be taken by the same bullet. When the officer led from the front, the sergeant carried the rear of the command system. When the lieutenant fell, the sergeant did not need to invent the mission. He already knew it. Take the hedgerow, destroy the gun, open the company's flank. That was the objective. Everything else was method. So he does not ask the dead man what to do. He does not call for a conference. He does not wait for permission that cannot come. He assigns the fight to the weapons. Suppress that nest. The Browning answers. The bowmen answer. Rifle grenades thump out from shallow cover. Dust kicks from the lip of the German firing position. The MG-42 crew has to choose. Keep tearing up the pinned men in the open or survive the American fire, now walking into their own hole. Then the sergeant sends the flanking squad right. That one decision changes the shape of the fight. The Germans had prepared to kill a line. Now the line has become an angle. The American squad slips into dead ground along a shallow ditch, moving where the main German field of fire cannot quite bite. The sergeant has not saved the platoon by being heroic. He has saved it by becoming the next copy of the plan. So the Germans do what their doctrine tells them to do. They look for the new brain. The sergeant rises just high enough to direct fire. The MG-42 shifts. A short burst hits the field. The sergeant disappears into the grass. Now from the German side, surely it is over. First officer, then radio, then platoon sergeant. That is not a wound. That is decapitation followed by spinal damage. No small unit should continue to coordinate after that. And yet the flanking squad keeps moving. The squad leader does not stop to be appointed. He does not crawl back across the field to find a higher authority. He does not ask whether the mission still exists. He knows the mission exists because he heard it before the first shot was fired. Back behind the line, the lieutenant had not merely pointed at a map and said, "Go there." He had explained the reason. That machine gun on the hedgerow is holding the company. One element fixes it. One element gives fire. One element moves right and kills it. The squad leader remembers the part that matters most. His squad is the right hook. So he becomes the attack. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. A fist pumping twice. Move faster. A flat palm pressing down. Stay low. 2 fingers to his eyes, then toward the hedgerow. Watch the flank. To the Germans, leadership should look like a man standing up and shouting. But this leader is nearly invisible. A crouched staff sergeant in a ditch. A hand signal, a nod. A rifleman shifting 10 yards to the right. A BR gunner turning his muzzle before anyone tells him twice. This is where the German picture of command begins to fail. They are looking for rank. The Americans are operating on function. They are looking for the man with the map. The mission has already escaped the map, and the weapons squad sees it too. No one reaches them with a fresh order. Their radio is gone. Their officer is gone. The platoon sergeant is down. But the crew behind the .30 caliber Browning understands the job of their gun. It is not merely to kill, it is to make movement possible. The gunner sees the right flank squad closing distance. He sees the German muzzle flash. He sees the shape of the problem. So he leans into the weapon and makes himself the most obvious target in the field. Every burst is a bargain. Shoot at us, not them. The assistant gunner feeds the belt. Brass spills into the mud. The barrel smokes. The German nest is now under pressure from the front, while danger creeps in from the side. The attack that was supposed to be headless has become harder to understand than it was before. Then the German mortar round lands, not perfectly, not cleanly, just close enough. A blast throws dirt over the ditch. A piece of hot metal catches the squad leader in the leg. He goes down within yards of the hedgerow. For the third time, a leader has fallen. Lieutenant, platoon sergeant, squad leader. The Germans have not failed at decapitation. They have performed it almost perfectly. But the American attack has one more unpleasant lesson to teach. A corporal crawls to the wounded sergeant. The sergeant does not give a speech. He does not describe the whole battle. He only points at the hedgerow. Finish it. That is enough, because the corporal does not need the whole map. He needs the objective, the machine gun nest. The same objective repeated down the chain until the lowest leader in the assault has the authority to act. He turns to the men nearest him. Grenades first, then we go. 4 hands pull 4 pins. The grenades arc over the hedgerow. For 4 seconds, the world holds its breath. Then the German position erupts in concussion and dirt. The corporal runs before the smoke has cleared. The final distance is ugly. Not a clean charge, not a painting. A stumble through torn grass, wet soil, and fear. Riflemen spill over the earthen bank. The fight collapses from 100 yards to the length of a rifle. Then it is over. The German machine gun is silent. The gunner who had killed the lieutenant, the radioman, the platoon sergeant, and the squad leader has lost to men he never considered command targets. The Germans aimed at the head. They had run into a nervous system. That system did not appear in Normandy by accident. It was built in the aftermath of humiliation. To understand why the Germans misread it, we have to go back to the desert. February 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Here, the United States Army met the Wehrmacht as a mass army still learning the trade of modern war. And the lesson was brutal. American units were scattered across poor positions. Tanks attacked without proper infantry support. Artillery sat exposed. Communications failed. Officers contradicted each other or waited too long. Whole units lost contact with neighboring units and began to come apart. At the center of the American command problem stood Major General Lloyd Fredendall, remote, distrustful, trying to control details from far behind the battle. His headquarters, dug into a mountainside, became a symbol of everything wrong with the American approach in that moment. The Germans did not need propaganda to make the Americans look bad. The battlefield did it for them. The American army was rich, but awkward, large, but inexperienced, well-equipped, but poorly synchronized. German officers read the evidence and made a professional judgment. This enemy had factories but not tactical maturity. He had trucks and radios but not battlefield culture. He could be dangerous in mass but brittle in shock. And in February 1943, that diagnosis was not insane. It was close enough to the truth to become dangerous. Because the Germans made one fatal assumption. They believed the American army they had beaten was the American army they would keep fighting. That is where victory became a blindfold. The Wehrmacht came from a tradition that treated military excellence as something grown slowly. A professional officer corps, a deep tactical language. years of experience. A culture passed from senior officers to juniors until initiative became instinct. By that standard, the Americans should have needed years. They did not have years. So they did something Germany did not fully understand. They treated defeat as a system failure, not as a wound to honor, not as a problem to bury, not as a reason to explain away what had happened. As data, Eisenhower went forward. Commanders were relieved. Fredendall was removed from Second Corps. Patton took over and did the opposite of remote control. He moved command forward. He forced discipline back into visible daily habits. He made a beaten formation feel watched, judged, and expected to perform. But the visible drama of Patton was only the surface. The deeper change happened in reports, training grounds, schools, and staff rooms. The Army asked the ugly questions. Why did communications fail? Because lines were vulnerable, radio procedure was poor, and commanders had not trained for breaks in control. Why did tanks die alone? Because combined arms cooperation existed on paper more than in muscle memory. Why did units freeze when officers fell? Because too much of the plan lived too high in the chain. Why were orders failing? Because they often explained movement better than purpose. Every failure became a repair order. Training changed, command climate changed. Junior leaders were forced to understand objectives, not merely routes. NCOs were pushed from being executors of instructions toward being holders of intent. The American Army did not become perfect. It became iterative. And that was the part Germany underestimated most. A perfect army protects its pride. An adaptive army studies its wounds. By Sicily, the change was already visible. German units still tried to cut the Americans apart the old way. Find the officer, kill the officer, watch the lines soften. But American platoons and companies increasingly refused to behave like the model. When a lieutenant fell, a sergeant took over. When a captain disappeared, a junior officer or senior NCO reorganized the perimeter. When radios failed, small groups still moved toward known objectives. Not always cleanly, not always brilliantly, but often enough to disturb the German pattern. The enemy they had labeled amateur was no longer staying inside the label. It was learning between rounds, and then came Normandy. If Tunisia exposed bad command, Normandy exposed bad assumptions. The Bocage stopped the Americans cold. Tanks could not simply roll through it. If a Sherman tried to climb the hedgerow, its belly rose into view and German anti-tank teams had the shot they wanted. If it went around, it was funneled into lanes already sighted for ambush. Every field became a puzzle box, every lane a trap, every wall of green a possible gun position. The Germans understood this terrain beautifully. They expected the Americans to solve it the way large armies usually solve problems. More artillery, more air, more pressure, more bodies. But a practical answer came from below. A sergeant named Curtis Cullen helped turn scrap steel from German obstacles into tusks for a Sherman tank. The modified tank did not climb the hedgerow. It bit into the bank and tore through it while staying level. A small mechanical insight changed the geometry of the fight. But the important thing was not only the device, it was the speed of adoption. The idea moved upward. Senior commanders saw it. Welders went to work. Ordnance units improvised production near the front. Scrap became hardware. Hardware became a tactical shift. Within weeks, many tanks in the attacking formations carried hedgerow cutters. The Germans saw the steel teeth. They did not see the organization that let a sergeant's battlefield answer become a divisional solution. They saw American industry. They missed American feedback. The same mistake happened with artillery. German soldiers feared American firepower for obvious reasons. There was a lot of it, but weight was only part of the terror. The more important feature was connection. A forward observer with a radio did not merely beg one battery for help. He entered a fire control network. Coordinates moved to fire direction centers. Guns miles apart received data. Different batteries, different calibers, different locations could be synchronized on one target. Sometimes the shells arrived as if the whole sky had been given a single command. To the men underneath it, this felt like industrial crushing power, and it was, but it was also computation, procedure, communication, trust in trained specialists. A system that could turn a single observer's report into a coordinated strike faster than a local German commander expected. Again, the German diagnosis narrowed everything to materiel. The Americans have more shells, more trucks, more fuel, more planes. All true, but incomplete. The shell was not the whole weapon. The network was the weapon. By late 1944, the German command believed it had found a way to strip that network away. The Ardennes, dense forest, narrow roads, bad weather, surprise. The perfect place to test the old theory again. If clouds grounded Allied aircraft, if roads jammed American movement, if German units cut telephone lines and isolated headquarters, if the offensive struck thin positions in winter darkness, then the Americans would be forced back into the condition Germany thought defined them. Leaderless, confused, separated from abundance, unable to coordinate. The plan for the Ardennes was not merely an armored attack. It was an argument. It argued that American strength was external. Air cover, logistics, radios, roads, mass, take those away, and the soft center of Kasserine would reappear. On December 16, 1944, the argument rolled forward behind artillery. At first, it seemed to work. American units were surprised. Lines broke, command posts lost contact, traffic jammed, weather blinded the sky. German spearheads punched into the forest and raced for road junctions. But the collapse the Germans needed did not arrive. Instead, the front filled with friction. Not a clean wall. Friction. A platoon here. A roadblock there. Engineers with explosives at a bridge. Tank destroyers covering a bend in the road. Cooks and clerks carrying rifles. Artillerymen firing in roles they had never expected. Small groups deciding that a crossroads mattered because everything behind it depended on time. Time became the American weapon. Every hour a German column was delayed was an hour the offensive could not afford. Every local stand created another jam. Every jam gave higher command a chance to understand the crisis. The Germans had hoped to trigger panic. They triggered stubborn decentralization. At St. Vith, scattered units helped slow the advance. At Bastogne, surrounded Americans held the road hub that German planners needed. Across the Ardennes, isolated groups without perfect orders kept choosing the same basic answer. Hold what matters, buy time, keep the enemy off schedule. This was not pretty, it was not effortless, and it was not proof that American command had no failures, but it proved the German theory was outdated. The army that collapsed awkwardly in Tunisia had been damaged, studied, rebuilt, and then damaged again. Each battlefield had changed it. Kasserine taught command failure. Sicily tested junior initiative. Normandy forced tactical invention. The artillery network rewarded communication. The Bocage rewarded practical problem-solving. The Ardennes demanded resilience under isolation. By the time Germany staged its last great offensive in the West, it was no longer attacking the American army of 1943. It was attacking the next version. and the next version could lose leaders without always losing purpose. That is the real irony. Germany's first major victory over the Americans may have been one of the most useful lessons it ever gave them. At Kasserine, the Wehrmacht exposed the weaknesses: brittle command, poor coordination, over-centralized control, inexperienced leadership, training that had not yet become combat instinct. But the Americans did not preserve those weaknesses as identity. They repaired them as defects. The German officer corps saw war as a professional art refined through tradition. The Americans increasingly treated it as a violent engineering problem. What broke? Why did it break? Who needs authority when the original authority is gone? What must every leader understand before the radio dies? What has to keep moving when the map case falls into the mud? That question returns us to the Norman field. The German marksman did exactly what he was trained to do. He killed the officer. The machine gun crew hit the radio man. Then they hit the platoon sergeant. Then a mortar round caught the squad leader. They removed the visible leaders one by one. And still, the assault kept moving because the mission had already been copied into other men. Not perfectly, not romantically, but sufficiently. The corporal who threw the final grenades did not possess the lieutenant's full picture. He possessed the part of the picture that mattered at that range. Destroy the gun. So he did. The German mistake was not that they aimed for leadership. Leadership was worth aiming for. The mistake was believing leadership lived only where rank was visible. In the American system that emerged from failure, leadership became a function that could pass downward under fire. A sergeant could become the platoon. A corporal could become the assault. A forward observer could become the voice of dozens of guns. A tank sergeant's idea could become a frontline modification. A broken unit at a snowy crossroads could become a delay strong enough to wreck a timetable. That is why the phrase material fully explains what happened. Factories mattered. Fuel mattered. Ships mattered. Shells mattered. But abundance does not automatically adapt. A warehouse does not know what to do with a hedgerow. A shell dump does not know where to fire. A radio does not create initiative by itself. A rank insignia does not keep a mission alive after the man wearing it is gone. The real American advantage was not only that it could produce more. It was that, under pressure, it learned how to change the way more was used. The Wehrmacht kept looking for the head of the snake. In Tunisia, it looked as if the snake could be killed that way. By Normandy, the snake had changed. By the Ardennes, it was not a snake at all. It was a nervous system spread through officers, sergeants, corporals, observers, mechanics, artillery plotters, engineers, and frightened riflemen who had been told enough of the purpose to keep moving when the plan broke. The Germans kept aiming at the head. The Americans had learned how to move the mission into the hands.